Hi, our presentation is about the Rwandan Genocide. First, Rwanda was a colony of Germany, but after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, Rwanda became a trusteeship of Belgium. The Belgians, who favored minority rule in their colonies, put the minority Tutsis in power over the majority Hutus. Also, Belgium manufactured fake differences among the Tutsis and Hutus, causing more tensions between the two groups. Tensions escalated as the Hutus forced the Tutsi monarchy out of Rwanda and established an all-Hutu provisional government. Finally, after a decision made by the UN, Rwanda was granted independence from Belgium, but occasional violence between the Hutus and Tutsis remained. Violence intensified as the Rwandan Patriotic Front, also known as the FPR, invaded Hutu-controlled Rwanda from Uganda. However, the fighting stopped as a ceasefire was negotiated between the FPR and the Hutu president Juvenal Habyarimana. Also, an agreement signed by both sides led to the FPR having some political involvement in the government. But Hutu extremists were opposed to this idea and would later retaliate. Here is an image of Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana. The Rwandan genocide started with the shooting down of a plane carrying President Habyarimana of Rwanda and President Ntaryamina of Burundi. At first, it was unknown who did this, but documents revealed in 2010 that it was in fact Hutu extremists. That same night that the Rwanda president's plane was shot down, violence against Tutsis began. Also, the situation in Rwanda got worse as Prime Minister Uwilingiyimana was assassinated along with the Belgian soldiers guarding her. The genocide and assassinations were planned by Hutu extremists Theonese Bagosora to gain control in Rwanda. A man named Theodore Sindikuwabo became interim president of Rwanda, but he was on the side of Bagosora, so he did not help stop the genocide. And here is a picture of Theonese Bagosora. It was not just government officials involved in the genocide either, but Hutu militia groups. For example, the Interahamwe, translating to "those who attack together," and the Impuzamugambi, translating to "those who have the same goal," played a central role in the genocide. Civilians were involved as well, as there are announcements for Hutus to find Tutsis and kill them. The Rwandan genocide was especially brutal because of the weapons used. Not all people had access to guns, so they had to use machetes, axes, scythes, and other tools to kill people. In total, about 200,000 Hutus participated, but some were forced by the government and other militia groups. Overall, the Rwandan genocide lasted for about 100 days. When it was over, an estimated 800,000 to 1 million Rwandans were killed, with about 94% killed were Tutsi. About 250,000 to 500,000 women were sexually assaulted, and about 300,000 children were killed. All in all, the international community did little to stop the Rwandan genocide. The UN had troops in Rwanda for the organization named the United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda, also known as UNAMIR, but it was unsuccessful in establishing a ceasefire. Also, the UN made questionable decisions to remove troops from Rwanda as the violence got worse, but they did not remove any Rwandans who were in danger. But General Romeo Dallaire tried to warn the UN about potential genocide before it happened, but the UN still did nothing. Also, journalists that were there did not mention civilian killings, and the UN was wary to call the Rwandan genocide a genocide. Lastly, UN force deployment was delayed because countries argued over payment, despite the UN having some of the richest countries in the world. Here is an image of General Romeo Dallaire, and below that is an image of wanted posters for the architects of the genocide.
RPF involvement in the Rwandan genocide. The RPF, which stands for Rwandan Patriotic Front, was a political and military party whose main goal was to avenge the exiled Tutsi ethnic minority of Rwandans and retake the Rwandan government. The RPF had been trying to take Rwanda for many years before the genocide began. In 1990, the RPF invaded Rwanda and killed many people. This caused the Hutu government to massacre the Tutsi people between 1990 and 1993 when the fighting was going on. The Hutu and Tutsi eventually came to agreements and the fighting stopped. However, in 1994, when the Rwandan president was killed in a conspiracy plane crash, mass killings of the Tutsi occurred because the Hutu extremists blamed the Tutsi, but the RAF blamed the Hutu for the tragedy. As the RPF led the destructive and gruesome military campaign, the Hutu government killed more and more Tutsi. Concerning the RPF's violations of human rights, many believe that the RPF wanted to control the power in Rwanda more than trying to free their own people from genocide, because they prioritized making military offenses more than plotting to free Tutsi from their genocide. Nevertheless, the RPF eventually win and they control the city of Kigali and establish their own government. The French involvement in the Rwandan genocide. The French took an interesting and passive role in the Rwandan genocide. Although France technically backed their current Rwandan government, the French were more interested in rescuing their own people than they did the Rwandan civilians and the Rwandan officials. Despite its wealth and military strength, France took a passive approach militarily in the genocide. They did start a military offensive called Operation Turquoise, but by that time, the operation began. Hundreds of thousands of Tutsi were killed. After 1994, France tried to cover up any involvement in the genocide. However, today, the media and France have come forward to discuss the genocide. Restorative justice and Rwandan rebuild. After the genocide, there were about 800,000 prisoners with relation to the genocide. To solve this problem, the Rwandan government came up with a unique way to give prisoners a trial in a different way than the West normally did. They did this through restorative justice and the Gakaka system. The goal of all this was to create a more efficient and long-term solution to the problems the Rwandanese people have endured. To do this, Gakaka worked to more help the criminals understand what they have done and why it is bad. Another step of restorative justice was to actually restore the victim by doing something positive for them. Overall, although this system comes with many problems and controversy, it is a good example of a country working out new ways to fix their country in the best way possible. Also, the Rwandan economy and infrastructure was in shambles after the genocide. 40% of their population was killed, along with many Rwandese being traumatized by the genocide. All this made for an intense labor shortage. Eventually, the economy got back on its feet with the exportation of tea and coffee. Overall, the Rwandan rebuild has been slow but progressive in its short 25-year government. Here's the works cited.